Welcome to Fundamentals of Faithful Fund Development. I am your presenter, Magdalena Nichols. I am currently the Chief Operating Officer at Jericho Road Community Health Center in Buffalo, New York. And on the screen, you will find my email address. Without further ado, let's jump right in. A little bit of background about myself. I have been in leadership for well over 15 years at this point. I have 6 years in nonprofit fundraising development work. I currently have a master's in healthcare administration, and I am currently working on a PhD because I don't have enough to do. My proposed dissertation study actually is looking at ethical dilemmas and decision-making in faith-based nonprofit organizations. Other roles that I carry and titles in my non-work life is as a child of Christ, obviously as a wife, a mother, a daughter, a leader, and as a friend. So, thinking about fundraising and really looking at fund development for 50,000 feet above, right? So the key things that folks often miss that they really have to kind of determine from the very beginning is who is encompassing their fundraising team, right? So really organizations really need to identify who are the key team members who will share the stories about the organization, right? When you're speaking to listeners from various funding sectors, whether they're coming from the faith-based world or the secular world, it's really important that they understand the stories about your organization. So really deciding who are those storytellers, right? Then the second thing is really determining what are those stories and really having clarity and focus and prioritizing on what your key initiatives are. And then the stories that are associated with them are exceptionally important when you're speaking to folks in order to be able to secure funding for your respective organizations. So how will the stories be told? So really determining how are you going to tell your stories? Are there going to be in-person stories? Are there going to be stories that you're telling directly? Are there going to be stories told in a format where you're interviewing various folks? It really just depends on what your organization's capacity is and how you want to go about telling those stories. But the storytelling, as you can tell at this point, is a critical part of fund development. And so understanding that really from 50,000 feet above and looking down is determining who those team members are. What are the key stories that align with what your main focus, your mission, your vision for organization is? And then how do you tell those stories is a critical part of the process. Vision casting, right? So vision casting through the storytelling. So there are key things that you have to focus on as a part of the format for the storytelling. So you want to focus on big picture things on what the organization is working on. You want to focus on the problems that the organization is helping to address in this season or just period as part of your mission and your vision, right? As faith-based nonprofit, federally qualified health centers or whatever type of organization you are, you're always kind of coming up against, folks that are either coming from the sacred world or the secular world. And there's issues that are associated with both. It's truly being able to speak to your donors is a critical and important part of that process. So the next thing is really being able to propose a solution, right? There's so many problems in our world across the board. And I'm sure if I ask each and every single one of you guys to kind of tell me some problems within your organization, you can list a ton of them, right? So really getting to the place where you can propose solutions. And I'll dive into that a little bit further as I continue further in the presentation. Providing an invitation for folks to be involved in developing the solution, right? Folks want to know that they have involvement, that they are being invited to be a part of the solution for whatever the issue is, whatever the funding you're looking to raise is as a part of the process. Providing folks with ways that they can help, right? There's multiple ways that people can help to help you get to your bottom line and help you kind of really carry out your mission and your vision. And again, I'll cover that a little more detail in a later slide. Getting to the place where you can make the financial ask and being comfortable to be able to make that financial ask is critically important to be able to do the job and to be able to secure the resources that are really important and intentionally needed to be able to carry out the mission of the work that you're doing. Right? Inviting folks to be able to name other people, which again, I'll cover in the other section when I talk about kind of ways that folks can help in the process, right? And then being able to effectively close the conversation, right? So this vision casting and going through the process, these are the bigger picture pieces, right? So again, determining the stories you're going to share. The stories have to be clear, as I finished mentioning in the previous slide, and helping the listener see what their role is in the bigger picture, in the vision that you're casting. challenges, right? So we're talking about sacred world versus secular world, and just kind of how those mesh together, right? So when we're talking about the sacred world view, you know, folks are thinking about it from a perspective of fulfillment of the Great Commission, right? Holistic approach to the Bible and what they're being called to be able to do to serve and meet the needs of other people. Clarity and reasons why somebody should give, right? From a sacred world, all that comes naturally, right? Ministering to the marginalized, that all kind of comes as a part of the process when you're thinking about it from a sacred world view, right? But you're also going to have folks that are listeners and donors that are coming from the secular world. And so you have to be able to speak to them just as much as well on why their role is so important in carrying out this mission vision that you're trying to carry out, right? And so for them, it's going to look like selfless care for others, right? An opportunity to do something bigger than one's self, right? That matters to people in this time during this season, right? Doing what is right, like what are you being called to do to kind of support whatever it is that we're doing in this season? And then just a deeper connection to a changing community, region, and world. These are the things and perspectives that are going to speak to folks that are coming from a secular worldview. And so this really speaks to the significance and importance of knowing that the audience that you're speaking to, right? And being able to meet them where they are. If you look at these two perspectives and these two views, they're pretty similar in perspective. However, it really, each one speaks specifically to the audience that you're speaking to. So understanding your audience, obviously, which you would know, is a critical and important part of that process. Owning the narrative, right? So when we think about sacred versus secular, right? Again, owning the narrative, you're going to have people who are going to be doubters, and you're going to have people that are going to be investors. And so really kind of looking and understanding both lenses is extremely important, because it really kind of helps to shape your conversation when you're meeting with donors as a part of the process, right? And so when you think about doubters, a doubter's lens is going to be, this is not my problem. I don't have anything to do with this, so forth, so on. You're going to have, this problem is too big to fix. Like, what do you want me to do about it, right? Another one, I don't live in that community. It has nothing to do with me, so I'm not going to get in that. And then you might also hear folks say that the folks you serve are not my responsibility. Like, you guys take care of that. It's not my problem, right? Then you're going to have the investor's lens, right? And this is where you kind of want to be able to speak to people intentionally to get them to understand that we are in community together, right? This community, this world that we're all called to serve in, the work that we're being called to do, we can do it better if we're doing it collectively and doing it together, right? Together, we can address this issue. We, right? The we part again, the importance of making folks feel important as a part of the process, a part of owning the solution and help you get to where you need to get to. And really making sure that folks understand that whatever their investment is, small, big, or large, is all the same, and it all helps to carry out whatever the mission is, right? Another one, that is my neighbor, right? Understanding that we are all each other's neighbors, going back to the story of the Good Samaritan, right? We have a responsibility to be able to care for one another and to make sure that we're all well in our world and in our community. And so getting that message out there that this is our neighbor that we're supporting as a part of the process. And then the last point that I would highlight is just that everyone deserves to be cared for, right? So really kind of emphasizing that message when you're speaking to people. Again, going back to the previous slide and really thinking about sacred versus secular. Who is your audience, right? And how do you speak to them to get them from being at a place where they have a doubter's lens to where they can pivot to being an investor, right? Understanding that rather than it being not my problem, is our community together, right? The problem is too big to fix, but together we can address this, right? I don't live in that community, but that's my neighbor, right? The folks you serve are not my responsibility, but everyone deserves to be cared for, all right? So really kind of having that that perspective, again, going from sacred to secular, and then that doubters, and then really changing those doubters over to investors is a critical and important part of the faithful fundraising process. So again, big picture, right? Really understanding what your organization's who, what, where, when, why, and how is critically important, because when you're meeting with somebody, their time is valuable, just like yours. And so you want to make sure that they can really understand what your organization actually does, right? Who is your organization? Where are they? When do they do what they do? Why do they do what they do? How do they do what they do? And so that's really big picture. And so as you're thinking about whether you're preparing or even you're already in the process, make sure that you have a clear understanding on these pieces. And as you're onboarding new people, especially when you have folks that are entering either the healthcare sector for the first time or just whatever your sector is for the first time, making sure that they understand the who, what, where, when, why, and how is critically important. So when we talk about the who is your organization, right? So if I ask you that today, what would your answer be? It's critically important that you are able to answer that question and the folks around you are able to answer it as well, right? So thinking about the what is your organization about, right? What do they do? And so being able to answer that in a clear and concise way that does not confuse people, that gets them to understand what your organization actually does, again, is a critical and important part of the process, right? The fund development process. Where's your organization doing this work, right? I think we often underestimate if we're already in a community that people just already know what we do. And so being able to talk about where your organization is doing the work is extremely important. Whether it's locally in your community, whether it's in a different community or even globally. So many organizations have branches now where they are doing work globally. And so being able to talk about where your organization is doing the work is extremely important. Right. The next thing is the when. When is your organization doing these things, right? So if it's a part of your mission, you're doing it year round. If you're talking about a specific program, you might just be talking about, we do this program only in the fall or only in the spring or whatever the case may be. So also being able to explain when your organization is doing the work is exceptionally important. Being able to explain why your organization is doing those things, right? And this goes back to the mission and vision of the organization. It's exceptionally important that the folks that are having these conversations can talk about the why, right? And I'll talk about that a little bit when I talk about the role of the person having the conversation, right? Really being able to talk about why you do the work that you do, and for folks to kind of get excited and energized just hearing you talking about why you do the work that you do. And so understanding your mission and your vision is an important part of that. Some organizations have longer mission and visions. And so sometimes it can be hard to memorize that, but really being able to pull out snippets of each one that makes sense to be able to explain and ensuring that everybody is saying the same thing on why your organization is doing what they do based on the mission and the vision is also important. And so understanding that is an important part of the process. The next thing is the how. How's your organization doing these things, right? Are they traveling from location to location? Are they just situated in one place? Are they doing it virtually? Explaining the how is also another important part of the process. And so understanding that and being able to explain it to folks is important because, again, they want to understand what the big picture of the organization is. And so knowing the who, what, where, when, why, and how is great. And it's important for folks to know, especially the listeners. So know that before you have these conversations, understanding your role. Many people underestimate their role. A few years back, I used to do a presentation for our organization, and I would ask, who's responsible for fundraising in the organization or fund development? It would be a part of an all-staff meeting. And I would say, if you're responsible for fundraising, stand up. And, often our fund development team would stand up and it would just be them. And I say, okay, that's not the answer. I'm going to ask the question again, who's responsible for fund development? And eventually the idea was to get everybody to stand up because we all have an important role in the process, right? Whether someone is entering your organization for the first time, the first person that they see is going to be a part of the process. They may be the one that encourages them or discourages them from ever getting to know your organization better and potentially being able to be a funder for your organization, right? So everybody has an important role in that process, and everybody within the organization, no matter what your position is, plays a role in the fund development cycle. But when you talk about the fund development team in itself, their roles are extremely important, right? So the listener that they're meeting with needs to know that whomever they're speaking to, that their role is important to the mission and vision of the organization and helping the organization to raise the needed funds that they're trying to raise to carry out the mission, right? The passion should radiate as a part of the conversation. When I started in fundraising, it was a nervous process because a lot of what I've heard was, people would come around and it would be like a business pitch, and I've always just not liked that. And fundraising does not have to be that. When you're excited about the work that you do and the mission of the organization, that's what people should be hearing when they're meeting with you. The excitement behind the mission and why it's so important. And so a lot of times when I would meet with potential donors or even folks that were already donating to our organization, a lot of times what they would tell me is, my God, I can see the excitement about your work. And that's all I wanted, right? That they got excited from watching my excitement about the work that we do and why it's important. And I think when you're true and you're authentic to yourself and in the process, that just radiates. And that's the main idea, right? Folks don't want to feel like they're being sold a product, right? They want to feel like they're going to be a part of a solution. They're going to be a part of solving a problem. And that's what's important to them. And so I always tell folks that, you know, when you're speaking to listeners, potential donors, or even existing donors, you don't have to oversell it. It doesn't have to be a business pitch. Just let your words flow as it would, and let your passion for the work that you're doing radiate through your words. And when it's natural and it flows like that, people will naturally catch that excitement and say, hey, I want to be a part of this. I want to know what you guys are doing and what's my role and how can I help? And often that's what we get is people asking, how can I help, right? And again, we'll cover what people can do to help later on in this presentation. Your role is critically important in that process. And everybody in your organization plays a critical role. And so I always emphasize that. And again, small exercise, but I always ask people, again, who's responsible? And the truth is we all are. But obviously with your key roles of folks that are responsible for fundraising for the organization, it's really important that they know the importance of their role to the mission and vision of the organization, while also recognizing that their passion for their work that you do should radiate through their words naturally. All right, so here we are with tangible ways to help. I think people naturally always feel nervous, especially if maybe fundraising is the first time that they're doing it, whether it is a member of your fund development team or a board member, whatever the case may be. But there are very tangible ways to help an organization carry out its work and its mission. And we often miss that because we probably get too prescriptive in, you know, we're looking to raise this is the money that we're looking to raise, blah, 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 blah. These are the ways that you can help, or the funds that you can help and blah, 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 blah. So we miss the picture at times. And so what I always tell people is that there are very intentional ways that as you're meeting with a listener, a donor, existing or new, that you should keep these things in mind. And I always say 4 specific ways to help, just kind of keep that in mind, right? When you think about the mission and the vision, can't be accomplished without the person. You want to emphasize that, right? Why this mission and vision is important and why it cannot be accomplished without you. And then there's some ways that you can help. The reality is that every single person you come in contact with may not be in a position where they can financially help, but there's other things that they can potentially do to help for sure, right? And so this is a way where when I meet with folks, I always want them to leave feeling like, oh, there's something that I can do. It may not necessarily be that I'm giving resources, or maybe the resources that I'll give will be a smaller amount, but there's other things that I can do. And Dr. Glick, our CEO, always says, no amount is too small, right? And so I always emphasize that when I speak to donors as well. Of course, you're going to have folks that can give at a higher capacity. You're going to have people that maybe can just give $10 or $25. Believe it or not, those amounts go a super long way over time. And so I always tell folks, you know, give what you can, and that'll go a long way, especially when it comes to the funding portion of it. However, there's other ways that folks can help as well. Some specific ways that people can help is by prayer. You all know that prayer goes a really, really long way. And, you know, when you're trying to fundraise or, you know, you're facing a deficit, whatever the case may be, there's absolutely power in corporate prayer. And so when I meet with folks, I ask them, please keep us in prayer. This is what we're looking to do. This is what we're looking to accomplish. And so just through that prayer, that sometimes that leads to other resources, or that leads to blessings being released. And so prayer is an easy and tangible way that folks can be involved and engaged in your mission and your work, right? Volunteering, right? I think we as a country are facing many challenges from a recruitment perspective. And so where we have opportunities to have volunteers come into our organization to be able to volunteer, whether from a health perspective or spiritual care, if you have a spiritual care department, or any other way, that saves the organization resources. It adds bodies to be able to carry out the mission, the vision of the organization. So don't underestimate the power of volunteerism and prayer, right? Somebody that you're meeting with can introduce you to other people. That could lead to resources or additional volunteers or additional folks interceding and praying for your organization and your work. And so that's always an invitation for folks to also be able to introduce you and your organization to other individuals that can help you carry out your work. So don't ever underestimate that as well. And then obviously just financial giving, right? Being able to invite people to give financially as a part of the process, again, is one of the 4 tangible and specific ways that people can help you carry out your mission and your vision and help you carry it out, recognizing the importance that they play in that. Right. The next thing is securing the gift. So walking through the financial ask, it's really important that you transition from one section of the conversation to the next. So the transition process is extremely important. And so, a lot of times we start off by kind of highlighting what work our organization does. From there, we transition into telling a story, right? Like if you're meeting with somebody who may be passionate about kids and you have a program that's focused on kids, perhaps that's what you focus your conversation on. Being able to then transition to making that ask and be clear with that ask, right? You don't want to be all over the place as you're making an ask to someone. Be clear, provide clarity on, maybe how much the cost of the program is, how much you're looking to raise, how much are you looking to ask of them, right? If you're unsure, then you want to kind of create that space for them to be able to kind of make that recommendation themselves on what they can give as a part of the process, right? And then give the space for the listener to speak. Often I think in the fundraising world, folks get nervous, right? So they're trying to fill the space when they're silenced, right? The donor may need the space or the listener may need the space to kind of think about what they want to give, or maybe just kind of process their own thoughts. And so give the space for them to speak and ask questions, pause in between. Pay attention to body language. I think we often miss folks' body language. And so paying attention to body language is another important part of the process. Start off with a one-time ask at a time, right? So one thing at a time. You don't have to ask for the world, right? Unless it's somebody who has already vocalized that they want to kind of give whatever. They don't really care specifically what it goes to or if it's designated or not. Be intentional about, making one ask at a time so that you're not all over the place, right? And then as you build and establish a relationship with that donor, it gives you the space to be able to ask for other things as you go, especially when you realize what their priorities individually is as far as giving is concerned, and their passions, right? Allow the space for the listener to provide names of other people. So when you ask, take that pause. Again, there's a consciousness that we all have where we tend to want to fill the void of silence. I have been guilty of that. I'll be in a car with someone and I'm just trying to fill the void by talking, right? Give folks a space to kind of just think of names if they have any. Maybe they want to think about it and then give it to you later, but give them the space to be able to think through that and then provide you with that information without having to rush through the conversation or the process. Closing the door and how to close the meeting, right? It's extremely important that you follow up, right? So the donor or the listener may get to the place where they say, I really kind of need some time to kind of think about it. Let me think about it and then I'll follow up with you. And so you can say, okay, when can I follow up with you? What would be a good time? Put it on your calendar and follow up with them. It doesn't have to be a rush thing. It doesn't have to be that you rush to follow up with them in the next day, but it is extremely important that you follow up. And that's where most folks lose and drop the ball, right? They're like, well, they said they were going to follow up with me and they didn't, right? Where sometimes the listener, the donor, they have so many different things going on in their own world. And it's not that they don't care, but they may be so caught up in that they don't have a chance to follow up with you. And so since you're the one having the conversation, it's extremely important that you follow up to kind of close that process as a part of the engagement that you've had, right? Placing an emphasis on valuing the listener's time. Thank them for their time. because everybody is busy. We live in a very busy world. I'm sure if you think about your own schedule, there are a multitude of things that you can think about that you could be doing at any given time throughout the course of your day. And so you want to place an emphasis on really valuing and thanking them for their time and for them meeting with you, right? And then obviously, I always say that if somebody is of the same faith and they're comfortable, I always want to wrap up in a prayer. I've had conversations where I've initiated the prayer or the listener/donor was interested in praying themselves, right? So really just praying for clarity on, whatever their gift is going to be. Again, thanking them and then just closing off the meeting in a very intentional way that obviously blesses them and also blesses you. I also often sometimes ask if the person has a prayer point or anything that I could be praying for them or for their family or whatever the case may be. Because again, at the end of the day, before they're anything else, they're a listener, they're a donor, they're human first. And so that human connection, I think, is extremely important as a part of the process. All right, so exercising and practicing what you've learned, I think is extremely important that you really exercise and take the time to practice the things that you've learned and really reflect on the answers. And so two key pieces that I always kind of start off with is the ability to be able to describe what your organization does in 3 minutes or less. Anytime we ever onboard somebody on our fund development team, we want them to get to the place where they can talk about the organization in 3 minutes or less, because, that's what they call the good old elevator pitch, right? So being able to speak comfortably. And a lot of times, if an organization has a very big mission, it's very hard and very easy to get lost. And then we do this program, we do that program, and so forth, so on. And so being able to speak to people and tell them about what your organization does in 3 minutes or less is extremely important. And so what I always say in this one, as far as a hint is concerned, is less is more, and categorize your services into buckets. So for example, when I talk about the work of Jericho Road, I always say our work is encompassed of 5 buckets of services. We have primary care, right? So serving patients from newborn all the way to geriatrics. We have community-based programmings that are designed to meet the needs of folks, depending on where they are. And so these are programs like financial education, helping somebody to open up a bank account, just social need type of programming that encompasses a part of that. We have our global work, which is the 3rd bucket of services. And so we have a clinic in Sierra Leone, a clinic in Congo, and a clinic in Nepal, right? Then I normally transition into, we have our family residency program, which really is help to design and educate the next set of medical providers into our community and into our world. And then the 5th bucket of services is our Vive shelter, which is for asylum seekers, and just the importance of that work and why we do what we do. And if you just heard me speak just now, that was less than 3 minutes. Those are the 5 buckets. And so you don't get into the details of each type of program until you kind of get to know the donor better, because then you can dive into a particular program. You don't want to talk to them about all the programs that you do, because they may not be interested in all that. And so you want to give them subcategories. And then as you engage with them, you get to learn what they're interested in, what their passions are. And then you can tailor your conversations and your stories thereafter around that, right? So then now transitioning to the story portion of things, right? 1 to 2 stories about your organization. And when it comes to the hint on this one, is the stories should be engaging and relative to your work, but also it could be relative to whatever the donor is in or listener is interested in, right? So again, when you go into the descriptions of what your organization is, categorizing it into buckets, then you want to get into stories that are really going to be relevant to the folks that you're speaking to, so that it's really intentional as a part of the process and a part of the conversation. And again, that goes a really long way. And so I always start off with kind of these 2 exercises, and we also use them again when we're training new folks to come into our fund development shop at our organization to kind of help carry out the mission of the organization as they're having conversations. And so being able to describe your organization in 3 minutes or less, and then also just being able to share stories. And again, less is more when you're thinking about the description, and being able to categorize it into buckets makes it a little more easier to remember. And then obviously being able to share stories that are intentionally linked to the work that you're doing. And so with that, I want to thank you for joining me for this presentation on Faithful Fund Development. Again, my name is Magdalena Nichols. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Jericho Road Community Health Center. I pray and hope that this presentation has blessed you. I pray for your organization as you think about fund development, and whether you already have a fund development shop or you are helping to enhance it or establish one within your organization. One, trust God in the process. I pray that, you involve him in every single conversation that you are having with any listeners, whether, again, secular or sacred, and you are intentional about those conversations. And of course, welcoming God in every conversation will never lead you in the wrong direction. Have a blessed one. Thank you again for joining me for this presentation, and I hope it blessed you as much as it blessed me.